Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the new Yankee Workshop. You've heard of a hand of cards, a pride of lions, a flock of geese. How about a nest of tables? That's what they're called, and I need one over at my house. So today we'll build a nest of tables right here in the new Yankee Workshop. Well, for quite some time we've been trying to find just the right end table to go next to our sofa in the living room, and we've had trouble. They're either too big or they're too tall. So I called in an old friend, Matt Buckley, who's an antiques expert, to see if he can help us. Hey Matt, what'd you bring us?
Oh, I brought you not just one table, but 3 tables.
Oh, that's neat.
It's a nest of tables. I'm sure you've seen this form, but the height is just about right, and it's all about utility. You have 2 extra tables for when you entertain or when you're sitting together watching the TV.
Just slide out, and I could imagine just picking up one of these tables and bringing it over to another chair where I could set down a drink or a snack. That's a great idea.
So that works for you? You like that form?
Yeah, I do, but you know, they seem like they might be a little bit flimsy. The legs are pretty thin in these stretches.
There is an aspect to the fact that they will be a little bit flimsy like this. But as far as this form, this is a pretty sturdy set. You have stretchers all around, and you have a nice square leg that will be sturdy.
But you certainly won't want someone to sit on top of this.
No, I don't think they'd be invited back if they sat down on top of that.
Now, tell me a little bit about the style. What is the style?
Well, these are from about 1920, so they're 20th century antique, as they say. And a lot of furniture was made during that period after the colonial revival period, where they put different forms together. You know, you can see that this leg is a Chippendale form where it's square and it has moldings, and then the front with the bowed edge is very Regency, which is English 1815, 1820.
So these are primarily English pieces.
You see quite a bit of them made in England. The form is made in all over Europe and England, even China. You can see it made today, even the modern forms where there's cubes that are fit together. Again, it's a very, there's lots of utility.
Are they valuable?
This set isn't terribly valuable. I think most people would find this affordable. But you will see some sets that are from the 19th century or late 18th century that there'll be a nest of 5 of them, and they'll be carved legs. They'll have a lacquer decoration on the top, sort of an Asian motif or something like that. That could approach 6 figures.
6 figures, really? Wow. Well, I do like the size. Now the inlay, that might be a little tricky. We haven't done much of that. What would you suggest for woods?
Well, I think that the mahogany or a walnut in the top is great. And I chose this set because the inlay was relatively simple. You just have this light wood string, and then the center medallion can certainly be reproduced by purchasing a form like that. You could buy a fan or a shell or something like that.
All right, so we wouldn't have to do the intricate marquetry, but we could inlay a piece that was already put together.
Right, exactly.
Well, I do like, as I said, I do like the size, and I do like the utilitarian aspect. You mind if I take a few measurements and photographs? Because
well, I thought you were going to buy this set.
Oh no, Matt, I just want to build them.
Fair enough, fair enough.
Thanks for your help.
Let me see them when they're done.
Well, here's our version of that nest of tables that Matt Buckley showed us. I built this one out of walnut. It looks good nested together, and I also like the way it looks when it's fanned out, the way the tables slide out one after another. It was a fun project to build, and it was also fun to do a bit of marquetry, and I'll show you how I do that later in the program. If you'd like to build your own nest of tables, a measure drawing is available with the materials list, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. Now here's a tip. If you're a woodworker, you have to know an arborist, a tree guy. Ours is Matt Fody. He's been a friend of the show for a long time, and recently he had to take down a black walnut tree. So he saved the wood for me, and that's what I used to build the prototype. I'm going to save this piece for another project, and today I'm going to use mahogany for the second one. I want to start by making the tops, which are only 3/8 of an inch thick. I can't get 3/8 inch stock at my hardwood supplier, but I can get 6/4, and by resawing it into 2 pieces, I can make a thin top without wasting a lot of material. Now, before we use any power tools, let's talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Now here's the piece of stock that I want to resaw, and I've drawn a line right down the center. I've set up the fence on my bandsaw, but I'm not going to run it against the fence because it might drift off. I've installed this round steel dowel, and I'll rest the stock against that, and I can navigate the piece to keep it on track. Now I want to make sure that one face is flat. And I'm going to take the good side and put it on my joiner, and as you can see, it's got a little bit of a twist through it. So a couple passes through will flatten it out. Now with the freshly jointed face down on the bed of my surface planer, I'll run it through until I get to the thickness I want. And one last step is to joint the edges so the pieces will be nice and tight when I glue them up. A little bit of glue on all the mating surfaces, and we'll clamp them up. No biscuits. At this point, the project is all about legs. There are 12 legs, 3 different heights, but the profile is the same on all of them. Here's a sample. And if I take this OG bit and I hold it here, you can see if I run this side and then this side, I get the profile that I want. The issue is how I run it through my router. Over here at the router table, I've set up an OG bit. The fence is 90 degrees to the table. If I had a router that could tip, I could use the standard fence to run the pieces through, but it doesn't. So I have to create a cradle. And I have these pieces of wood that are stuck to the table with double stick tape. This piece, although it appears it might be 45 degrees, is actually 51.5 degrees right at that corner, and this piece is 38.5, giving me a cradle that's 90 degrees to support the piece. With the fence adjusted and the bit height adjusted, I can run the pieces through, first on one side, then the other side, creating the profile that I want. I want to show you the assembly. The legs are connected by rails and stretchers. If I tip it back, you can see that the side rails are 5/8 of an inch wide and they're flush to the inside of the leg. The back rail is a 1/2 inch wide and it's centered on the leg. The stretchers are 5/16 of an inch thick and they're centered on the legs. This is just dry fit together so I can pull it apart to show you the various mortises, which I'll make first. They're 1/4 of an inch wide and 1/4 of an inch deep. The mortise for the side rails is centered. The one for the back rail is offset slightly, and the ones for the stretchers are centered. I like to make all the mortises first and then fit the tenons to the mortise using my dedicated mortiser with a 1/4 inch square chisel, and I've set the fence to make the mortises for the back rails first. Well, now I'm ready to form tenons, and the first thing I want to do is set the length of the tenon. They're all 1/4 of an inch, so I've set up this stop block and adjusted my fence, and that's a test nick just on the corner to check the length, and that looks good. That's 1/4 inch. Now I want to set the height of the blade, and I want to start with 5/16 of an inch. So I have this little gauge. I crank the blade up until it just hits it, and lower it down just a touch. I'll run the same piece through. Okay, now I want to check that. Get a 1/4 inch length, and the depth of that cut is right on 5/16, and that corresponds to a shoulder cut on the 5/8 inch thick pieces of stock, one on each end of these 4 pieces. That completes the 5/16 inch cut on this stock. Now, rather than continue forming this tenon, I'm going to move on to this material, the 1/2 inch stock, where I have to make a 3/16 inch deep cut. I have another piece of scrap to test it out on. I'll set the height first and then check it. Now I'm going to lower the blade a bit more to 1/8 of an inch and nibble away the top and bottom of all the pieces. So now I'm down to 1/16 of an inch, and I'll run all the rails that need that cut. Now down to 1/32 of an inch for some shoulder cuts on the stretchers. To make the cheek cuts for the tenons, I'm using my tenoning jig. Now the height of the blade will remain the same. It'll always be 1/4 of an inch because the tenon is 1/4 of an inch long. I'll have to adjust the location of the side cut. Here I've just made a cut on the tenon of the 5/16 inch stock. I've adjusted the tenoning jig again to complete the 1/2 inch tenons. The last setup is for the stretchers, and that's a very shallow cut. If we take another look at the nest of tables, you see that the top edge of the stretchers is just slightly rounded over. So over at the router table, I've set up a 1/2 inch half round bit, and I'll run the pieces through. Now look again at the dry fit table. The top will be secured to the base with screws, just like it was on the antique. So if you look underneath all the rails, you see counterbores for the head of the screws. There's a through hole, and then on the side rails, I've counterbored the 2 outer holes to allow some movement of the top. Well, at last, we're ready for some glue up. I'm using a dark wood glue so that it won't show in any of the joints. And I'm applying a nice coat to the tenons and in the mortises. These are very small joints, but I want to make sure they're glued very well. Now, I don't know if the antique table had ever had its joints re-glued, but it was nearly 100 years old, and it was holding together quite well. With our modern glues, I should expect all of that and even more. Well, there's 2 of the tables glued up, and before I leave tonight, I'm going to finish up the smallest of the 3, let them set in the clamps overnight, and tomorrow we'll complete these tables by making the tops and doing a little bit of inlay work. Well, here they are out of the clamps after sitting overnight, nice and strong. They need a little more sanding, however, before they can go to the finishing room. I want to start working on the tops today, and here's the top that we glued up earlier from the resawn mahogany. I've drawn 2 lines on it, which is the width of the top table, the largest, and here I have a template that I took from the antique original. I'm going to set that between the 2 lines, making sure that it's perfectly set up, and trace the serpentine edge. Now I want to cut a groove to inlay some maple all the way around the perimeter of this top. And I want it to be about 1/8 of an inch deep and 3/4 of an inch in from the edge. So I've made another template out of 1/4 inch plywood, and I've sized it to this tool. It has an 1/8 inch bit in it and this small base. When I run the base against the inside of the template, it'll place the groove exactly where I want it. Now, I could do this with a router, but I like the size and the agility of this tool. What I want to do is center the template over my layout lines and pin it down. Now, as with all routed operations, you end up with a round corner. So I want to square that up with my chisel. Well, now for that center medallion. Matt was right. I could buy pre-made marquetry pieces like this one. There's a variety of choices. I thought this one would work well on our table. This is the back side, and it's held together with some tape. I want to remove the square portion. I don't need that. I just want the circle, so I'm very carefully going to break that away. Okay, that's pretty good. Now, as far as the species of wood, I'm not sure about all of these. This looks like ebony, maybe some maple around the perimeter. And the fan, I'm not sure. Whether it's made by machine or by hand, it's beautifully done. And I got to tell you this, it is very, very thin. Now, I want to get it perfectly centered, so I've put a center mark here. But I'm going to cover that with the piece. So what I'm going to do is take my compass, which is set for a slightly larger diameter, and just draw a circle. And then I'm going to take a piece of double stick tape and put that down, and then we'll stick it in place. Okay, now this is actually the back side, so I want to flip this over, and I'm going to try to get the fan to be across the table and center it in my pencil marks. Press it down. Now I also want to locate it, because when I put it back, it might not be a perfect circle. So I'm going to put a pencil mark here, one here, and one here. So when I actually glue it in place, I want it to be right in that location. Now I'll take this little scalpel and very carefully outline the inlay piece, cutting into the wood just the right depth. If I get good at this, maybe there's a career for me in surgery. Okay, that's off. Now I want to set the depth of my rotary tool. And I've got the bit just a fraction of an inch below the base. But before I commit to the top, I'm going to do a little test in this corner of waste material. That's pretty good. Well, now I'm ready to route, and I'm going to stay about 1/8 of an inch inside that score line. Now I'll very carefully remove the remaining material with hand tools. All right, let's see how it fits. That's going to be pretty good once it's glued in there. Now for this little inlay, I ripped some pieces of 1/8 inch square maple, and I have to miter the corners. And the best tool for that is this little guillotine. It's actually a tool used by picture framers. And just shave it off at the correct angle. Bring it back, make sure it fits, mark the other end, and trim that. Right there. Let's see how that fits. Usually want to spring it in there, want it nice and tight. Push it down. That's going to be good. Now I'll pull them all out and glue them in. I'll use a little more of this dark wood glue, make sure it's fully coated. And we need a block of wood to drive it in. Now for my little medallion, I'm using some quick setting glue. And just spread out a nice thin coat all the way around. Okay, now I'm going to set it in, aligning it with my pencil marks that I made earlier. Wipe off a little bit of that excess glue. Put a piece of plastic so it won't stick to this block of wood that I'm going to clamp over it while it cures. Here are the blanks for the two intermediate tops, and I want to round over the ends and the back using the same 1/2 inch round over bit that I used earlier. Now I'm going to secure the two intermediate tops to their bases, centered side to side and a 1/2 inch in from the back. I'm just going to use 3 screws for now to hold it in place. I want to pre-drill a hole, being careful not to go all the way through. And I'm using these trim head screws. Now the two larger tables have these little cleats which go on the side rails. And that allows you to pick up all 3 tables at once without them falling apart. Now with the curved edges cut on the bandsaw, I'll smooth them up with my drum sander. Well, now I'm just sanding the maple inlay flush to the top. Now that I'm down to 220 grit sandpaper, very fine sandpaper, I'll sand the Medallion. I don't have much to work with, I gotta be careful. That's all I'm gonna do. The easiest way to round over these curved front edges of the tops is simply by hand. But with the large top secured to the base, I can now take the second table, which has the top temporarily secured, slide it in until it bottoms out against the back, and trace it so it'll align perfectly when the tables are nested together. Now there's the second table. Let's put in the third table. Mark the front the same way, cut it and sand it, and reinstall it. And then we'll be ready for the finishing room. Now we want to stain the mahogany to make it look darker, but we don't want to lose the contrast of the inlay. So we called a finisher friend of ours, Mike Bushway, and he said what you have to do is put a coat of shellac, 3-pound shellac cut in half, over the areas that you don't want to stain. So that's what I'm doing here. The good thing about shellac is that if you make a mistake, you can just sand it out and do it again. It's reversible. All right, well, the shellac is dry now, and I'm applying the stain, which is a combination of red mahogany and brown mahogany. Now put it on the top. I'm just laying on a thin coat. It soaks in pretty quickly. I'll let it set for a couple seconds and rub off any excess. Now, it's a little bit scary doing this, putting this very dark stain over this wood, but it looks like that shellac is doing the job. The stain doesn't seem to be taking on those areas. Okay, let's wipe it off. It looks pretty good. Didn't stain that maple. Let's see what it looks like when I get to this medallion. That's going to be the key. Oh, look at that. It didn't stain it at all. It's popping right out. That's great. Now, a little bit did bleed through onto the maple here. I think if I carefully sand it, I can get it away. After I finish staining the entire piece, all 3 tables, we'll let it dry overnight, and then we'll cover it with a few coats of polyurethane. Well, here's our nest of tables with its 3rd coat of polyurethane. And now that marquetry is really starting to pop out. This was a fun project to build, and these are going to come in really handy. Now let me show you what I'm going to build next time. Antiques experts call this a window bench. It's great at the foot of the bed or under a window. I'll show you how to build it and upholster it next time right here in the New Yankee Workshop.
If you've enjoyed this New Yankee project, you may want to try some of the others. There are projects meant for the workshop, the garden, the kitchen, and many more. So whether you're a fan of Shaker style, or colonial, arts and crafts, or Chippendale, there may be a Norm project you'd like to build. Whether it's a clock or a gazebo, a picnic bench or a Windsor chair, a child's toy or a sailboat, visit the New Yankee website at www.newyankee.com for a complete listing.